The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with nervous energy as Ambassador Vextar of the Zorlian Republic shifted his 6 legs beneath the ceremonial table. Around him, representatives from 47 different species sat in their various atmospheric pods, breathing apparatus, and gravitational fields, all waiting for the same thing: salvation from the Devourers. The war had been raging for 3 standard cycles now, and the combined fleets of the Galactic Council had lost every major engagement. The Devourers, a machine intelligence that consumed entire star systems to fuel their expansion, had already claimed 12 systems in the Outer Rim. Their advance seemed unstoppable, their tactics brutally efficient, and their technology far superior to anything the Council possessed. The situation grows more desperate with each passing solar rotation, announced Chancellor HFY, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into prismatic patterns. Our latest intelligence reports indicate the Devourer fleet has begun moving toward the Kepler Nexus. If they take that system, they'll have a direct route to the core worlds. A collective shudder ran through the assembly. The core worlds housed over 2 trillion beings across 50 planets. It would be the largest genocide in galactic history. What do the Xerian empires offer of alliance? Asked General Claxtor, his mandibles clicking nervously. Their military might could. The Xerions demand complete subjugation of all Council worlds in exchange for protection, Chancellor HFY interrupted. We would merely trade one form of extinction for another. It was then that Ambassador Kretal of the Centauri Federation raised one of her 4 arms. There is another option, one we have yet to explore. The chamber fell silent. Kretal was known for her conservative approach to galactic politics, rarely suggesting anything beyond standard diplomatic protocols. The humans, she said simply. A wave of surprised chittering, hissing, and electronic bleeping filled the chamber. Ambassador Vextar's compound eyes widened in disbelief. The humans, scoffed General Claxtor. They've only achieved faster-than-light travel within the last 50 of their years. They have no significant military presence beyond their single-star system. What could they possibly offer against the Devourers? Kretal's tentacles swayed thoughtfully. Intelligence reports suggest they have certain, unique qualities. Their wars among themselves have been remarkably brutal and innovative. They appear to possess tactical thinking that defies conventional military doctrine. Primitive savagery is hardly what we need, muttered Ambassador Zephyr of the Aquatic Collective, his translation device crackling with static from within his water tank. With respect, Kretal continued, our conventional military doctrine has failed spectacularly. Perhaps primitive savagery is exactly what we need. Chancellor HFY leaned forward, her crystalline form catching the light. What exactly are you proposing, Ambassador? We request military advisors from Earth, human commanders to assist in developing new strategies against the Devourers. Their species has shown remarkable adaptability and creativity in warfare throughout their history. The debate that followed lasted 6 hours. Species after species argued against involving a primitive world in their sophisticated conflict. The humans had barely colonized their own moon permanently, let alone demonstrated any capability for large-scale space warfare. They were seen as an amusing curiosity at best, a young species that had managed to avoid destroying itself long enough to achieve basic spaceflight. But desperation has a way of making even the most impossible options seem reasonable. When the vote was finally called, it passed by a narrow margin of 3 votes. The galaxy's greatest civilization would humble itself before a species that still used chemical rockets for transportation. The message was transmitted to Earth within the day. To the government of the United Earth Federation, the Galactic Council formally requests military assistance in our conflict against an existential threat known as the Devourers. We seek human military advisors to assist in strategic planning and tactical innovation. Time is of critical importance. Please respond with your most capable commanders. On Earth, the message created chaos in government halls and military academies. Humanity had known about the Galactic Council for only 2 years, ever since first contact with a Centauri science vessel. The idea that these advanced civilizations needed human help seemed absurd. President Martinez convened an emergency meeting with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. "They want our military commanders," she said, reading from the translation device. "Apparently, they're losing a war against some kind of machine intelligence." General Patricia Hayes, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, frowned as she reviewed the limited intelligence they had on galactic affairs. "Ma'am, this could be our chance to establish humanity as a serious player in galactic politics. But we need to send our absolute best. Who did you have in mind?" General Hayes pulled up a holographic display showing personnel files. "I was thinking Admiral Thompson or General Rodriguez. Both have exemplary records and experience commanding large-scale operations." President Martinez nodded, then paused. "Actually, I have a different idea. What about Colonel Sarah Chun?" The room fell silent. General Hayes cleared her throat carefully. "Ma'am, with all due respect, Colonel Chun she's currently stationed at the Titan Research Facility. She's not exactly command material for this type of assignment." "Precisely why she's perfect," President Martinez said with a slight smile. "They asked for our most capable commanders. They didn't specify they wanted our most conventional ones." Colonel Sarah Chun had been humanity's most decorated military officer until the incident at the Battle of New Singapore. Her tactics had saved 2 million civilian lives, but her methods had been so ruthless and unconventional that even her own superiors had been disturbed. She'd been quietly reassigned to a research position, her brilliant military mind relegated to analyzing theoretical combat scenarios. Chun was in her laboratory on Titan, working on adaptive warfare algorithms, when the secure communication came through. The holographic image of President Martinez materialized in front of her workstation. "Colonel Chun, I have an assignment for you." Chun set down her datapad and stood at attention. "Yes, ma'am. How would you feel about representing humanity in our first interstellar military operation?" For the first time in 3 years, Colonel Chun smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. 2 days later, a small diplomatic vessel departed from Earth orbit, carrying Colonel Sarah Chun and a team of 12 military specialists toward the Galactic Council headquarters at Alpha Centauri. The journey would take 6 weeks using human faster-than-light technology, compared to the few days it would take a Council ship, but time was something they could still spare. During the voyage, Chun studied everything available about the Devourers and the galactic military forces arrayed against them. What she found confirmed her growing suspicions about why the Council was losing so badly. "They fight like they're conducting a chess match," she told her aide, Lieutenant Commander Torres, as they reviewed tactical reports in her quarters. "Everything is planned, measured, calculated. They announce their intentions, follow established protocols, and engage in what amounts to ritualized combat." "That doesn't sound like a bad approach, ma'am," Torres replied. "Organized military doctrine has served us well." Chun pulled up a hologram showing the last major engagement between Council forces and the Devourers. "Watch this." The Council fleet arranges itself in a perfect formation, advances at optimal tactical speed, and engages the enemy at maximum weapons range. Textbook fleet engagement. The hologram showed the Council ships moving in precise formations, their weapons firing in coordinated volleys. It looked impressive and professional. "Now watch the Devourers," Chun continued. The enemy fleet moved like a single organism, adapting instantly to every Council maneuver. When the Council ships moved to flank, the Devourers anticipated and countered. When the Council tried to withdraw, the Devourers predicted the retreat routes and cut them off. It was like watching a master chess player compete against children. The Devourers aren't just machines, Chun realized. They're learning machines. Every engagement teaches them more about Council tactics. And Council tactics are so standardized that each battle just makes the Devourers better at predicting what they'll do next. "So what's the solution?" Chin's smile returned, and Torres found himself taking an unconscious step backward. "Simple. We stop playing chess and start playing poker. We lie, we cheat, we bluff, and we make moves that make no logical sense until it's too late for them to counter. Ma'am, with respect, that doesn't sound like military doctrine. That sounds like what humans do best. Chen finished. Exactly. When their ship finally arrived at the council headquarters, Chun and her team were met with barely concealed skepticism. The aliens who greeted them were polite, but clearly doubtful that these primitive beings could offer anything useful. Ambassador Kreetal met them at the docking bay, her tentacles writhing in what Chen's cultural briefing had told her was nervous anticipation. Colonel Chun, welcome to Alpha Centauri Station. I trust your journey was comfortable. Adequate, Ambassador. I understand you have a war that needs winning. The directness of the statement seemed to catch Kreetal off guard. Yes, well, we hope you can offer some fresh perspectives on our strategic challenges. Chen looked around the pristine docking bay, noting the perfectly organized equipment, the uniformed personnel moving with practiced precision, the gleaming surfaces that spoke of a civilization that valued order above all else. Before we begin, I need to understand something, Chen said. How long has it been since any species in your council fought a war against another council species? Kreetal's tentacles stilled. That would be over 4,000 years. The council was formed specifically to prevent such conflicts. And how long since any of your species fought a war of survival, where defeat meant the complete extinction of your civilization? Such scenarios are extremely rare. Perhaps 8,000 years during the Plague Wars. Chen nodded slowly. That explains everything. I'm afraid I don't understand. You've forgotten how to fight, Chen said simply. You know how to conduct military operations, how to follow protocols, how to minimize casualties and collateral damage. But you've forgotten how to fight for your life. The walk to the briefing room was conducted in uncomfortable silence. Chen's team followed behind, their equipment looking crude and primitive next to the advanced technology surrounding them. But Chen had noticed something the aliens had missed. Every system, every protocol, every procedure was designed for efficiency and predictability. There was no redundancy, no chaos, no controlled madness that could confuse an adaptive enemy. The briefing room was a marvel of alien engineering, with holographic displays that could render three-dimensional battle scenarios with perfect clarity. 24 alien military commanders were present, representing the finest tactical minds in the galaxy. General Klaxtor, the insectoid military commander, activated a display showing the current strategic situation. As you can see, the Devourers have established a clear pattern of advance. They probe our defenses, identify weaknesses, and then strike with overwhelming force at our most vulnerable points. Chen studied the display with interest. How many times have you engaged them using the same basic tactical framework? The same framework? General Klaxtor's mandibles clicked in confusion. We have adapted our tactics based on battlefield conditions, naturally, but always within established military doctrine. Of course, random tactics would be inefficient and dangerous. Chun smiled, and several aliens shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Show me your last engagement. The hologram displayed the most recent battle, where a council fleet of 200 ships had been completely destroyed by a smaller Devourer force. Chun watched in silence as the council ships moved in perfect formation, engaged at optimal range, and were systematically outmaneuvered and destroyed. Textbook execution, she said when it was finished. Absolutely perfect military doctrine. That's why you lost. The room erupted in indignant protests. General Klaxtor's voice rose above the others. Those tactics represent thousands of years of military evolution. They're the most efficient methods of space combat ever developed. Against opponents who follow the same rules, Chun agreed. But your enemy doesn't follow rules. They don't care about efficiency or minimizing losses or conducting honorable warfare. They care about winning, and they're very good at it. She stood and walked to the holographic display. May I? After receiving reluctant permission, Chen began manipulating the controls. The battle replay reset to its beginning. Now, let me show you what humans would have done in this situation. What followed was unlike anything the alien commanders had ever seen. Instead of maintaining formation, Chen's hypothetical fleet scattered in what appeared to be complete chaos. Ships moved in seemingly random patterns, some attacking, others appearing to flee, still others doing nothing at all. "This is madness," General Claxtor protested. "There's no coordination, no tactical coherence." "Keep watching," Chen said calmly. As the simulation continued, the apparent chaos began to reveal an underlying pattern. The fleeing ships weren't actually fleeing. They were drawing the Devourers into a trap. The ships doing nothing were actually lying in wait. The attacking ships weren't trying to win their individual engagements. They were forcing the enemy to reveal their tactical adaptations. When the trap finally sprung, the Devourer fleet found themselves caught between three converging forces, their adaptive algorithms confused by the contradictory data they'd been fed. In Chen's simulation, the Council fleet achieved a decisive victory. The room fell silent. Finally, Chancellor THYSS spoke. "This is highly irregular. The casualty rates in your scenario would be unacceptable. Lower than 100%, Chen pointed out, which is what you've been achieving with conventional tactics." Ambassador Vextar leaned forward on his 6 legs. Even if these tactics worked once, the Devourers would adapt. They would learn to counter such chaotic strategies. Chen's smile widened. "That's the beauty of it. There's nothing to learn. Chaos, by definition, can't be predicted or countered. Every engagement would be completely different, using different levels of apparent disorder to mask different underlying strategies." "You're asking us to abandon everything we know about warfare," General Claxtor said. "I'm asking you to remember what warfare actually is," Chen replied. "It's not a chess match. It's a knife fight in a dark room. And humans are very, very good at knife fights." The meeting continued for several more hours, with Chen demonstrating increasingly unconventional tactical scenarios. Each one seemed to violate every principle of military science, yet each one achieved decisive results against Devourer forces. As the session finally ended, Chancellor THYSS approached Chen privately. "Colonel, I must ask, are these tactics typical of human warfare?" Chen considered the question carefully. "These are actually quite conservative compared to some of our historical battles. I'm trying not to shock you too much on the first day." The Chancellor's crystalline form shimmered with what might have been fear. "I see. And you believe these methods will be effective against the Devourers?" "I believe they're the only methods that will be effective," Chen said. "The question is whether your people can stomach what it takes to win." That night, as Chen reviewed intelligence reports in her assigned quarters, she began to understand the true scope of the challenge ahead. It wasn't just about developing new tactics. It was about convincing an entire galactic civilization to abandon everything they believed about civilized warfare. Her communication device chimed with an incoming message from Earth. President Martinez's image appeared on the small screen. "Colonel, how are things progressing?" "They're exactly as desperate as they claim to be, ma'am. And exactly as naive about what it takes to win a war of survival." "Can you work with them?" Chen looked out the viewport at the vast alien installation surrounding her, thinking about the polite, civilized beings who had spent millennia perfecting the art of limited warfare. Tomorrow, she would begin teaching them that sometimes the only way to preserve civilization was to temporarily abandon it. "Give me a few weeks, ma'am. I'll either save their galaxy or get court-martialed for war crimes." President Martinez's expression grew serious. "Sarah, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about helping them. This is about proving that humanity belongs among the stars. Whatever you do out there will determine how the galaxy sees us for centuries to come." Chen nodded slowly. "Understood, ma'am. They asked for human commanders. They're about to find out what that really means." As the communication ended, Chen returned to studying the tactical reports. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, the Devourer fleets were advancing toward their next target. They had learned to counter every conventional strategy the galaxy could devise. But They had never encountered anything like what was coming for them now. 3 weeks had passed since Colonel Chin's arrival at Alpha Centauri Station, and the alien command staff had grown increasingly uncomfortable with her methods. What had begun as tactical consultations had evolved into something far more disturbing, a complete deconstruction of everything they thought they knew about warfare. Chun stood before the assembled commanders in what had once been called a briefing room, but now resembled something closer to a war college classroom. Holographic displays showed dozens of historical human conflicts, each one more brutal and chaotic than the last. The Battle of Stalingrad, she announced, highlighting a particular engagement. 2 million casualties over 5 months. Neither side followed conventional military doctrine. Both armies devolved into street-by-street, building-by-building fighting that made no tactical sense by your standards. General Claxtor's mandibles clicked nervously. This appears to be madness, not warfare. And yet the defenders won, Chen pointed out. They took an enemy force that was superior in every measurable way and ground them down through pure, stubborn refusal to follow the rules of civilized combat. She changed the display to show another conflict. The Tet Offensive in Vietnam. The attacking force violated every principle of military surprise by launching coordinated attacks during a religious holiday when they were supposed to be observing a ceasefire. By your standards, it was dishonest and unprofessional. It was dishonest and unprofessional, Ambassador Vextar interjected. It was also devastatingly effective, Chun continued. The psychological impact of the attacks achieved strategic objectives that conventional military victories could never have accomplished. Chancellor THYSS had remained silent throughout most of these sessions, but now she leaned forward. Colonel Chun, we appreciate the historical context, but how do these examples apply to our current situation? Chun smiled, and by now the aliens had learned to be very nervous when she did that. Because I've been studying the Devourer's tactical adaptations, and I've identified a critical flaw in their learning algorithms. She activated a new display showing detailed analysis of Devourer combat patterns. They learn by observing and cataloging tactical responses. Every time you do something, they record it, analyze it, and develop counters. But their learning is based on the assumption that their opponents are trying to win efficiently. That seems like a reasonable assumption, General Claxtor said. It is for civilized species. But humans don't always try to win efficiently. Sometimes we try to win by any means necessary, even if those means appear to be insane. Chin pulled up a tactical simulation she'd been working on. I call it the Kobayashi Maru principle, after an old Earth training scenario. The idea is to create a situation where victory is impossible by conventional standards, then change the rules of the game entirely. The simulation showed a standard council fleet facing a superior Devourer force. But instead of engaging normally, Chin's proposed tactics involved something the aliens had never seen before: deliberate self-sacrifice as a tactical weapon. You're suggesting we use our own ships as weapons? Ambassador Kretal's tentacles writhed in distress. I'm suggesting we use everything as weapons, Chin clarified. Ships, stations, asteroids, debris fields, stellar phenomena. Anything that can be turned into a tool for destroying the enemy. She manipulated the controls, and the simulation showed Council ships deliberately damaging themselves to create debris fields that would interfere with Devourer sensors. Other ships were shown hiding in asteroid fields not for protection, but to use the asteroids as improvised projectiles. This is barbarism, General Claxtor protested. This is survival, Chun countered. And, more importantly, this is unpredictable. The Devourer's learning algorithms are designed to process tactical data from species that value efficiency and preservation of resources. They can't process tactics that deliberately waste resources to achieve psychological or strategic effects. To demonstrate her point, Chin showed them footage from Earth's archives, kamikaze attacks from World War II, where pilots deliberately crashed their aircraft into enemy ships. By every measure of military efficiency, this was a wasteful tactic, she explained. It traded valuable, trained pilots and aircraft for relatively minor damage to enemy vessels. But the psychological impact was enormous. It forced the enemy to divert massive resources to defense against an attack that made no logical sense. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Finally, Chancellor THYSS spoke. "You're asking us to fight like animals. I'm asking you to fight like humans," Chen said. "There's a difference, though I understand why you might not see it." Over the following days, Chen began implementing small-scale training exercises with volunteer crews. The results were exactly what she had expected. Complete disaster by conventional standards, but with occasional flashes of the kind of chaotic brilliance that might actually work against the Devourers. Lieutenant Commander Torres found Chun in the observation deck overlooking the training areas, watching alien crews attempt to execute human-style tactics. "Ma'am, the Centauri team just lost their third simulation in a row. They're requesting permission to return to standard tactical protocols." Chun watched as a Centauri ship commander tried to execute a feint maneuver that would have made perfect sense to a human pilot, but completely confused his own crew. Denied. They need to learn to think like predators instead of administrators. "With respect, ma'am, maybe we're pushing too hard. These species have been conducting warfare according to established protocols for thousands of years. It might be unrealistic to expect them to change overnight." Chun turned to face her aide. "Torres, how long do we have before the Devourers reach the Kepler Nexus?" 17 days, ma'am. "And how long will it take them to adapt to any conventional tactics we might teach these crews?" "Based on their learning curve, probably less than one engagement." "Then, we don't have time to be gentle about this. Either they learn to fight like humans, or 2 trillion beings die while maintaining their dignity." Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the command center. A long-range probe had detected Devourer scout ships near the Rigel system, much closer to Council space than expected. Chun and Torres rushed to the command center, where they found the alien commanders in a state of barely controlled panic. "The probe data shows at least 50 scout vessels," General Claxtor reported. "They're conducting detailed scans of our defensive positions around Kepler." "How long before they finish their reconnaissance?" Chen asked. "Perhaps 6 days," Chancellor THYSS replied. "After that, they'll have enough tactical data to plan their attack on the Nexus." Chen studied the probe data with growing excitement. "This is perfect." The room fell silent. General Claxtor's mandibles clicked in disbelief. "Perfect? Colonel, those scouts represent the prelude to the largest assault in galactic history." "Exactly," Chen said. "And they're assuming we'll respond conventionally. They're expecting us to either withdraw from the system or reinforce our positions. Instead, we're going to do something they've never seen before." She moved to the tactical display and began outlining her plan. What she proposed was so unconventional that it took several minutes for the alien commanders to even understand what she was suggesting. "You want to use civilian vessels as attack ships." Ambassador Vextar's compound eyes widened in horror. "Converted civilian vessels," Chen clarified. "Freighters, passenger liners, mining ships, anything with engines and cargo space. We arm them with improvised weapons and send them against the scouts." "That's a war crime by every standard of civilized warfare," General Claxtor protested. "Only if we use them to target civilian populations," Chen replied. "Using civilian vessels against military targets is unconventional, but not illegal. And, more importantly, it's something the Devourers will never expect." Chancellor THYSS leaned forward. "Explain your reasoning, Colonel." Chen activated a new tactical display. "The Devourers have extensive data on Council military vessels, their capabilities, limitations, and tactical applications. They know exactly how to counter every ship in your fleet. But they have no data on civilian ships because no civilized species has ever used them in combat." She showed a simulation of her proposed attack. A converted freighter loaded with mining explosives becomes a guided missile. A passenger liner becomes a troop transport for boarding actions. A research vessel becomes an electronic warfare platform. None of these applications appear in their tactical databases. Even if the attack succeeded, Ambassador Kretal said, the casualties would be enormous. Civilian crews have no military training, which is exactly why it will work, Chen explained. Trained military personnel follow predictable patterns. Scared civilians with improvised weapons do whatever seems most likely to keep them alive. That's completely unpredictable. The debate that followed was intense and often angry. The alien commanders struggled to accept tactics that violated everything they believed about honorable warfare. But as the hours passed and the Devourer scouts continued their reconnaissance, desperation began to override principle. Finally, Chancellor THYSS called for a decision. Colonel Chun, if we authorize this operation, what are the chances of success? Chun considered the question carefully. Against any other enemy? 0. The tactics I'm proposing would be suicide against a conventional military force. But the Devourers aren't conventional. They're adaptive, which means they can be confused. If we can confuse them long enough, we might buy the time we need for something even better. Something better? Phase 2 of my plan. But first, we need to see how they react to Phase 1. The vote was closer than Chun had expected, but it passed. Within hours, the galaxy's most advanced civilization was commissioning freighter captains and mining crews to serve as impromptu military commanders. Chun personally supervised the conversion of the first wave of civilian vessels at a shipyard orbiting Alpha Centauri. Watching alien engineers attempt to mount military-grade weapons on cargo haulers was like watching a careful museum curator trying to build a pipe bomb. The weapon mountings are completely inefficient, complained Chief Engineer Zwyx Tao, a crystalline being from the same species as Chancellor THYSS. The recoil will damage the ship's superstructure with each shot. Good, Chen replied. That adds to the unpredictability. Make sure the weapon systems can be fired manually if the computer targeting fails. But manual targeting is wildly inaccurate. Wildly inaccurate can be more effective than precise if your enemy is trying to predict your shots. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Captain Morgex, a gruff Zorlian freighter captain who had volunteered for the mission. His 6 legs carried him across the deck with surprising grace for someone who had spent his career hauling cargo between star systems. Human Commander Chun, he said, his translation device rendering his clicks and hisses in his standard galactic speech. My crew wishes to understand the tactical objectives for our vessel. Chun pulled up the specifications for Morgex's converted freighter. The ship had been fitted with improvised missile launchers, reinforced hull plating, and enough explosives to destroy a small moon. Your objective is simple, Captain. Get close enough to a Devourer scout ship to ram it. Morgex's compound eyes blinked in confusion. Ram it? You mean deliberately crash into an enemy vessel? Exactly. Your ship is now essentially a very large missile with a crew. The alien captain was quiet for a long moment. Then, to Chen's surprise, he began making a sound that his translator identified as laughter. You humans are completely insane, he said. I like this plan very much. 2 days later, the improvised fleet was ready. 57 civilian vessels of various types, each converted into something that barely qualified as a warship by any reasonable standard. Their crews were terrified, their weapons were improvised, and their tactics were based on principles that violated every rule of civilized warfare. Chen watched from the command center as the fleet prepared to depart for the Rigel system. The alien commanders around her were clearly having second thoughts about the entire operation. Colonel, General Claxtor said, I feel I should point out that if this attack fails, we'll have essentially announced our intentions to the enemy while achieving nothing. And if we do nothing, they'll finish their reconnaissance and destroy the Kepler Nexus, Chen replied. At least this way, we might surprise them. The fleet jumped to faster-than-light travel in a formation that looked more like a mob than a military force. Chen's plan called for them to emerge from FDL at scattered points throughout the Rigel system, making it impossible for the Devourers to predict where the attacks would come from. 6 hours later, the first engagement reports began arriving. The results exceeded even Chen's expectations. The Devourer scouts, encountering weapons and tactics they had never seen before, suffered catastrophic losses in the initial minutes of combat. Captain Morgex's ramming attack alone destroyed 3 scout ships before his vessel was finally destroyed. But the most important result wasn't the tactical victory. It was the psychological impact on both sides. The Devourer fleet's adaptive algorithms were forced to process combat data that made no sense according to their understanding of warfare. Meanwhile, the surviving civilian crews returned to base with something the galaxy hadn't seen in 3 years of war: confidence. "They can be hurt," reported Captain Sylvan of the converted passenger liner Bright Journey. "Their ships are advanced, but they're not invincible. And they were clearly confused by our attack patterns." Chun smiled as she reviewed the after-action reports. Phase 1 had worked better than she had dared hope. Now it was time for Phase 2, teaching the Devourers that chaos was just the beginning of what humans could bring to a war. She called for another meeting with the alien commanders, but this time her presentation was different. Instead of historical examples and theoretical tactics, she showed them real combat footage from the Rigel engagement. "Notice how the Devourer ships attempt to withdraw when they realize conventional countermeasures aren't working," she pointed out. "They're programmed to preserve their units for future engagements, which means they value their ships more than they value immediate tactical objectives." "That seems tactically sound," General Claxtor observed. "It is against conventional forces, but it creates an exploitable weakness. If we can convince them that engaging our forces will result in unacceptable losses regardless of tactical considerations, they might be forced to change their entire strategic approach." Chancellor THYSS studied the combat footage with growing understanding. "You're suggesting we make every engagement so costly for them that they can't afford to fight us, even when they're winning." "I'm suggesting we make every engagement so unpredictable that their learning algorithms break down entirely," Chin said. "And then, while they're trying to figure out what went wrong with their tactical analysis, we hit them with something even worse." "Which is?" Chin's smile was genuinely frightening now. "Phase 3. But first, I need to make a call to Earth. There are some people I need to bring out here, and some equipment that the Council is definitely not going to approve of." As the meeting dispersed, Chin remained in the briefing room, staring at the tactical displays showing Devourer fleet movements. They were already adapting to the Rigel engagement, modifying their scout patterns to account for the possibility of civilian vessel attacks. But that was exactly what she had expected. The Devourers were excellent at learning from their mistakes. Unfortunately for them, Chen had no intention of making the same mistake twice. Every engagement from now on would be completely different from the last, using tactics that became more chaotic and unpredictable with each iteration. She activated her secure communication link to Earth and waited for President Martinez to respond. When the connection finally established, she could see the exhaustion on the president's face. "Sarah, I've been following the reports. That was quite a gamble you took at Rigel." "It was a necessary test, ma'am. I needed to confirm that the Devourer's adaptive systems could be confused by sufficiently chaotic tactics. And now I need you to authorize the deployment of some assets that will probably violate several sections of the Galactic Military Convention." President Martinez was quiet for a moment. "What kind of assets?" Chen pulled up a list on her display. "I need the Crazy Ivan protocols activated. All of them." The president's face went pale. "Sarah, those protocols were classified beyond top secret for a reason. Some of those projects were considered too dangerous even for human warfare. The galaxy is facing extinction, ma'am. I think this qualifies as an appropriate escalation." After a long pause, President Martinez nodded. "I'll authorize the deployment. But, Sarah, if this goes wrong, there won't be any courts-martial. We'll all be too dead for justice." "Understood, Mom." Chin out. As the communication ended, Chin began reviewing the classified files that would soon be arriving from Earth. Humanity had spent decades developing weapons and tactics that were considered too brutal, too unpredictable, and too dangerous for use against other humans. The Devourers were about to discover that sometimes the most civilized species in the galaxy needed the most uncivilized weapons to defend themselves. And they were about to learn what happened when you picked a fight with the one species that had turned warfare into an art form. The arrival of the Earth transport vessel created more anxiety among the alien commanders than the approaching Devourer fleet. Chen watched through the observation deck as the massive cargo ship docked with Alpha Centauri Station, its hull marked only with the innocuous designation Scientific Research Vessel Pandora. Colonel, Lieutenant Commander Torres said quietly, "The manifest for that ship is completely classified. Even I don't have clearance to know what's on board." She nodded without taking her eyes off the docking procedures. That's because what's on that ship represents 30 years of human military research projects that were deemed too dangerous for actual deployment. Too dangerous for human warfare? Too dangerous for warfare between civilized species, Chen corrected. But the Devourers aren't a civilized species. They're an extinction-level threat. Different rules apply. The unloading process took 6 hours, and Chen noticed that even the human crew members handling the cargo seemed nervous about what they were carrying. Each container was marked with warning symbols in a dozen human languages, and some were kept in specialized containment fields that made the surrounding air shimmer with energy. Chancellor HFY arrived at the docking bay as the last containers were being secured in a restricted storage area. Her crystalline form was refracting light in agitated patterns that Chun had learned indicated extreme stress. "Colonel Chun, my intelligence staff has informed me that several of these shipments are emitting energy signatures consistent with weapons of mass destruction." "That's a very loaded term." "Chancellor," Chun replied diplomatically, "these are specialized military assets designed for use against non-biological targets. The distinction seems rather academic when the weapons in question could potentially sterilize entire star systems." Chen turned to face the Chancellor directly. "How many star systems have the Devourers already sterilized?" 12. "And how many more will they destroy if we continue fighting them with conventional weapons?" The question hung in the air between them. Chancellor HFY's form slowly stopped refracting light as she processed the implications. "What exactly are you planning to deploy, Colonel?" "Insurance policies," Chen said simply. "Weapons that are so completely insane that even the Devourer's adaptive algorithms won't be able to process them effectively." 3 days later, Chun convened what would become known as the Classified Assets Briefing. Only the highest-ranking alien commanders were present, and each had been required to sign documents that essentially placed them under human security protocols. The briefing room had been modified to accommodate the various atmospheric and gravitational requirements of the assembled species, but the mood remained uniformly tense as Chun began her presentation. "What you're about to see represents the collective insanity of human weapons development over the past century," she announced. "Some of these projects were abandoned because they were too destructive. Others were abandoned because they were too unpredictable. A few were abandoned because they scared the people who created them." The first holographic display showed what appeared to be a standard missile system. General Claxtor leaned forward to examine the specifications. "This appears to be a conventional fusion warhead delivery system," he observed. "Look closer at the targeting parameters," Chen suggested. As the alien commander studied the data, his mandibles began clicking in confusion. These targeting algorithms, they appear to be designed to deliberately miss their intended targets. "Correct. This is the Chaos Swarm system. Each missile is programmed to miss its primary target by a random distance, then detonate in a pattern that creates maximum debris and interference. The goal isn't to destroy enemy ships directly. It's to create an environment where accurate combat becomes impossible." She activated a combat simulation showing the weapon in action. Council ships launched hundreds of missiles at an enemy fleet, but instead of impacting directly, they exploded in seemingly random patterns throughout the battle space. Within minutes, the entire combat area was filled with debris, energy discharges, and sensor interference. The Devourer's tactical advantage depends on precise calculations and predictable enemy behavior, Chen explained. This weapon system eliminates both precision and predictability from the engagement. Ambassador Vextar raised one of his 6 limbs. But wouldn't this interference affect our ships as well? Absolutely, Chen confirmed. Our ships would be operating blind, just like the enemy. The difference is that our tactics are designed to function in chaotic environments. Theirs aren't. The next weapon system drew even more disturbed reactions from the alien commanders. The holographic display showed what appeared to be a delivery system for some kind of nanoscale devices. These are replicator disruptors, Chen announced. Nanoscale machines designed to target and interfere with any form of adaptive learning system. The room fell silent. Finally, Chancellor THYSS spoke. Colonel, are you describing a weapon that attacks artificial intelligence systems? I'm describing a weapon that attacks the ability to learn from experience, Chen clarified. The nanomachines are designed to introduce random errors into adaptive algorithms. They don't destroy the target systems. They just make them increasingly unreliable over time. General Claxtor's compound eyes widened in horror. You're talking about deliberately inducing insanity in enemy computer systems. I'm talking about leveling the playing field, Chen replied. The Devourer's primary advantage is their ability to adapt faster than we can change tactics. This weapon removes that advantage by making their adaptations increasingly erratic. The simulation showed Devourer ships beginning an engagement with perfect tactical coordination, but as the nanomachines spread through their systems, their formations began to break down. Ships started making increasingly random maneuvers until they were effectively fighting each other as much as the Council forces. The psychological effect on a machine intelligence would be considerable, Chen noted. Imagine being unable to trust your own calculations, knowing that every decision you make might be based on corrupted data. Ambassador Kretal's tentacles were writhing with agitation. This seems unnecessarily cruel, even for machines. Cruelty implies the ability to suffer, Chen said. I'm not sure the Devourers qualify, but if they do, then they should have considered that before they decided to exterminate 2 trillion sentient beings. The third weapon system was even more disturbing. The holographic display showed what appeared to be some kind of space-time manipulation device. This is the temporal displacement array, Chen announced. It creates localized time dilation fields that can be deployed as tactical weapons. The aliens stared at the display in stunned silence. Finally, Chancellor THYSS managed to speak. You're talking about weaponizing time itself. We're talking about creating combat conditions that are literally impossible to predict or counter, Chen corrected. Enemy ships caught in a time dilation field experience time at a different rate than the surrounding battle. From their perspective, our weapons appear to move at impossible speeds. From our perspective, they appear to be moving in slow motion. The simulation showed Council ships deploying time dilation fields around enemy formations. The trapped Devourer ships found themselves unable to maneuver effectively as the battle around them accelerated beyond their ability to process. Meanwhile, Council ships could position themselves with perfect precision before the enemy could react. The adaptive algorithms would be completely useless, General Claxtor observed with growing understanding. They couldn't process tactical data fast enough to formulate responses. Worse than that, Chen said, the temporal displacement is variable and unpredictable. Sometimes the effect lasts for seconds, sometimes for hours. The enemy can never know when they'll be released from the field or what the tactical situation will be when they are. But it was the fourth weapon system that finally pushed the alien commanders beyond their comfort zone entirely. The holographic display showed what appeared to be a collection of asteroids fitted with propulsion systems. This is the Berserker Protocol, Chen announced. We take asteroids, equip them with basic AI systems and propulsion units, and program them to seek out and ram enemy ships at significant fractions of light speed. The room erupted in protests. Ambassador Vextar's voice rose above the others. You're describing a weapon that could destroy planets. I'm describing a weapon that could end this war, Chen replied calmly. Each asteroid is programmed to target only ships matching Devourer energy signatures. They're not planet killers. They're ship killers that happen to be the size of mountains. The simulation showed hundreds of asteroids accelerating toward a Devourer fleet, each one guided by simple but effective targeting systems. The enemy ships tried to destroy the incoming projectiles, but there were too many of them, and each asteroid had enough mass to cause devastating damage, even if only partially destroyed. The psychological effect would be enormous, Chen noted. Imagine facing an enemy that uses entire asteroids as bullets. The Devourer's tactical algorithms would struggle to process threats on that scale. Chancellor THYSS was flickering rapidly now, her crystalline form showing extreme stress. Colonel Chun, these weapons, they represent a completely different philosophy of warfare than anything we've ever contemplated. They represent human warfare, Chun said. We've had thousands of years to develop ways of killing each other more effectively. These weapons are the result of that experience applied to a non-human enemy. But the collateral damage would be minimal compared to what the Devourers will do if we lose, Chun interrupted. Every one of these weapons is designed to be used in space, away from populated worlds. The only casualties would be enemy ships and any Council forces unable to clear the area in time. General Claxtor leaned back in his seat, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. Colonel, if we deploy these weapons, there will be no going back. The galaxy will never see us the same way again. General, if we don't deploy them, there won't be a galaxy left to have an opinion, Chen replied. The debate that followed lasted for hours. The alien commanders struggled with the moral implications of weapons that seemed to violate every principle of civilized warfare. But as reports continued to arrive of Devourer fleet movements toward the Kepler Nexus, desperation once again began to override principle. Finally, Chancellor THYSS called for a decision. Colonel Chun, if we authorize the deployment of these weapons systems, what are our chances of victory? Chun considered the question carefully. Against any conventional enemy, these weapons would be massive overkill. Against the Devourers, they might be enough to confuse their adaptive systems long enough for us to achieve strategic objectives. And what would those objectives be? Phase 4 of my plan, Chun said with a smile that made several aliens shift uncomfortably. But I can't implement Phase 4 until we've demonstrated that Phases 1 through 3 can completely disrupt their learning algorithms. What is Phase 4? Something that will either end this war permanently or get every human in the galaxy charged with crimes against sentience. The vote was even closer than before, but it passed. Within hours, human technicians were working with alien engineers to integrate Earth's most classified weapons systems with Council military platforms. Chen supervised the weapon installations personally, knowing that this was likely the point of no return. Once these weapons were deployed, humanity would be revealed as something far more dangerous than the galaxy had ever imagined. Lieutenant Commander Torres found her in the primary weapons bay, watching technicians install the Chaos Swarm system on a Council battleship. Ma'am, I have to ask, are we the good guys in this scenario? Chen paused in her examination of the weapon control systems. Torres, what do you know about the concept of total war? The idea that all resources and tactics are acceptable when facing an existential threat? Exactly. The galaxy has been fighting this war like it's a police action. Minimal casualties, precise targeting, adherence to established protocols. But this isn't a police action. This is total war against an enemy that wants to exterminate every living thing in the galaxy. She gestured toward the weapons being installed around them. These systems represent humanity's transition from civilized warfare to survival warfare. The aliens are uncomfortable with that transition, but it's the only thing that's going to save them. And after the war? What happens when the galaxy realizes what we're capable of? Chen smiled grimly. Then, they'll understand why it's better to have humans as allies than as enemies. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the command center. Admiral Reynolds of the Earth Defense Force appeared on Chen's personal communicator. Colonel, We've received intelligence that the main Devourer fleet is accelerating their timeline. They're moving toward Kepler ahead of schedule. How long do we have? 72 hours before they reach optimal attack position. Chen nodded slowly. Understood, Admiral. We'll be ready. As the communication ended, she turned to Torres. Signal all teams to accelerate the weapons integration. We're moving to combat deployment immediately. Ma'am, the alien crews haven't finished training on the new systems. They'll learn on the job, Chen said. The Devourers are about to get a demonstration of what human military engineering can accomplish when we're properly motivated. Over the next 72 hours, the largest fleet in galactic history assembled around the Kepler Nexus. Council ships from 47 different species, supported by human weapon systems that violated every convention of civilized warfare. The alien crews were terrified, confused, and completely unprepared for what they were about to experience. Chen stood on the bridge of the Council flagship, watching as the Devourer fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. Their formation was perfect, their approach methodical and calculated. They had adapted their tactics based on the lessons learned from the Rigel engagement, and they were clearly confident in their ability to handle any conventional response. They have no idea what's about to hit them, Torres observed. Chun smiled as she activated the fleet communication system. All ships, this is Colonel Chun. Today we teach the Devourers that humanity doesn't fight wars to win battles. We fight wars to end them permanently. Weapons free. Execute Chaos Protocol. Across the fleet, human weapon systems came online for the first time in combat. Chaos Swarm missiles launched in seemingly random patterns. Replicator disruptors began their invisible assault on enemy computer systems. Temporal displacement arrays activated, creating pockets of altered time throughout the battle space. And somewhere in the asteroid fields of the outer system, hundreds of modified asteroids began accelerating toward the Devourer fleet at significant fractions of light speed. The most advanced machine intelligence in galactic history was about to discover what happened when it picked a fight with the one species that had turned unpredictability into an art form.